Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy with my guest on this IFAMA 2020 Goes Digital show. He's 93 years old. He coined the term agribusiness in 1955, and he created IFAMA. Who is that? Well, that is the one and only Ray Goldberg. And Ray, I'm very happy that I still have the honor to meet you. 93 is quite an age. And well, I've met someone who has become very special to me. And even though we've met only last week, but it's already there. Ray, how come you got involved in the agricultural economy, in agricultural economics? Tell us and tell the audience about your background.
Well, I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, and my father was in the grain business, and we had a farm, and I have been in agriculture all my life. And my father was a farmer who worked closely with the agricultural college on creating new seeds and new varieties for our farm and for the community. And he also had a registered herd of Aberdeen Angus cattle, so he's very interested in breeding and trying to improve the quality of that food. And when I left my high school in Fargo, North Dakota, I went to Harvard and majored in government with a minor in economics and history. And then I went on to Harvard Business School. And when I went on to Harvard Business School, I couldn't find an agricultural course in the whole university except one, and that was headed up by John D. Black, a very famous agricultural economist. And he had this postdoctoral course, and I was fearful of being a graduate student going to a postdoctoral course, but I asked his permission if I could join his course, and he was kind enough to do that. Once I was in that course, I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I decided that I would leave the business school and go back to the family business in North Dakota and Minnesota. On my way out, I thanked him for the privilege of being in his course, and he wanted me to sit down and give me a few of his ideas. And he said, "Ray, I know you better than you know yourself. I want you to get a PhD." And I said, "I'm going back to a family business. I don't need a PhD in agricultural economics for that." He said, "Well, stop off in Minnesota and Minneapolis." I taught there before I came to Harvard. See what they have to offer. Well, I did stop there, and much to my surprise, they said that they would wanted me to be in their doctoral program. And once I was in their doctoral program, I wrote my thesis on the soybean industry, which was a new industry in the Midwest. And the University of Minnesota Press liked that and published it as a book. And I decided after that I needed to understand how our business related to the rest of the world. So I went east and interviewed a global agribusiness firm, and they offered me a job. And on my way back to North Dakota, I stopped off in Minneapolis, and the head of the department was there. And he said, "Ray, there's a phone call waiting for you when you get back to Fargo from Harvard Business School." I said, "Why?" He said, "They want you to help create a course." And I turned around and went back, and I was interviewed by the dean and Dr. Davos, who was then Assistant Secretary of Agriculture under Eisenhower. And they both encouraged me to join them to help create a new program at Harvard Business School. And that's how I got started.
Started, there was a seed already, but you developed the seed.
I developed the seed, but I did it with John Davis. He was my mentor and my boss, and together we wrote a book called A Concept of Agribusiness. And that's when we defined the word and the concept. And again, I was influenced by two other professors. One was Vasily Leontiev, who won a Nobel Prize for input-output economics. And I thought that in agriculture, everybody's input was somebody else's output. And by using his concept, I was able to create a system of looking at the food system. And also at MIT, there was a famous Professor Jay Forrester who had just developed system analysis. So between the input-output analysis of Leontiev, the systems analysis of my colleague at MIT, together, John Davis and I created the book, A Concept of Agribusiness.
Right. So that is systems theory of agriculture and the food business.
Exactly.
And that is agribusiness, the whole concept developed.
Well, it was a terrible word. We kept thinking about what to do. John and I spent hours, actually days, trying to write a proper name for it. But we realized that in the food system, everybody has to make a living in it. And we were at a business school, so we used agribusiness.
But would you have preferred if I say socialist word, you wouldn't agree because you're American.
I don't mind a socialist word, and I didn't realize how negative the word business has become, because to most people, business is a dirty word, and I didn't realize it would corrupt what I was trying to do with John. So
you didn't mean it to be corrupt anyhow. If I think of Peter Drucker, the famous marketing theorist, he said you need to create a fair exchange. Was that what you were after, a fair exchange?
Yes, something like that. I was trying to use a word that would encompass collaboration and cooperation. And I thought that agriculture and business talked about how you were going to feed the world, how you were going to provide nutrition, how you were going to provide economic development, how you were going to improve the environment, because farmers manage the land and water resources. And I couldn't think of another word, nor could John, so that's what we ended up with.
You've just taught the world that agribusiness is about creating shared value.
It is. And I'm glad that Hans Johr at Nestle has developed that, and Professor Porter at Harvard Business School also developed creating shared value. So it isn't just the food system that understands shared value. It's the whole world economy. And shared value is also a mixture of private, public, and not-for-profit sectors all working together. It isn't just the private sector. And also, what we pay for consuming food and what we get paid for producing food are political questions as well as economic questions. So all of that is interrelated and interdependent in the word agribusiness and in the research we've done. But I'm so glad that it was accepted. There's now more people majoring in agribusiness and agribusiness management than there is in agricultural economics.
And that is what you did, and that is what you did at Harvard. And right. Now we'll jump to IFAMA. In the 90s, you created IFAMA. And when I learned what you've done, I said to myself, you are ahead of your time, because we're talking here in the Netherlands and in the rest of the world, we need to integrate agriculture, economics, but also health, the whole health problem and the ecological problem. So it's integrating agriculture, ecology, health, and the economy, the role of government as a stakeholder and the role of the private sector as a stakeholder. You created that already in the 90s. And as we can see from what you just said, the ideas were already present in your head in the 50s. Is that correct?
Yes, they were always present for another reason. When I was an undergraduate, I did my thesis on the Nonpartisan League in North Dakota. This was a socialist group that won the Republican primary, because in North Dakota, it's a Republican state. And if you win the primary, you usually win the election, the final election. And it was a revolt, and people had been the farmer had been taken advantage by the banks, the railroads, the grain elevators. And it was an unfair system. And they won the election, and they decided to create a state-owned elevator, a state-owned bank, and a state-owned flour mill. And to this date, it's the only state of the United States that still has a state-owned bank, a state-owned elevator, and a state-owned flour mill. When the conservative Republicans wanted to get into power, all they had to say was, we can manage it better, we'll keep what they've done. And that's what happened.
And it still works.
And it still works, and it's very successful.
You've told me you've worked at the company the Wallace family created. Henry Wallace, the famous New Deal minister under Roosevelt. Would he have approved of that? Was that a way of regulating the free market, perhaps?
I think he would have, and I was fortunate enough to be the first outside director of Pioneer Hybrid Seed, which was the Wallace family's operation, which they turned into a public company. And they wanted somebody from the outside. And when I sat there and listened to my fellow directors, I realized that what I was talking about, they were trying to do. And I felt that the reason they wanted me there was because of the agribusiness approach to decision making.
Okay. So a kind of socialism still works in the US. I'm European.
No, I know. But the word socialist, and our current president tries to make it a dirty word, but really it's just one form of trying to get society to think in more consumer-oriented ways. That's all.
Thank you. By the way, I'm a liberal.
Yeah, and frankly, I think having watched people in the Dust Bowl in North Dakota as a small child and going to visit their farms, trying to sell them seeds or feed or fertilizer, and sometimes they had already sold their dining room table. They couldn't afford to keep it. They were standing up eating, and I really realized that something had to change, and I never wanted to see that happen again.
You've been there. You've seen what a Dust Bowl means, and so you've seen what not...
Yeah, I've seen what poor people also, when you look at statistics, it's very confusing. If you look at the statistics in the United States, there were 6 million farms in 1930, and there were 6 million farms in 1933, but half of those farms were lost. Can you believe? That's not just a farm, that's their home.
Existence. Yeah.
So that also influenced my thinking a great deal.
Mm-hmm. you need to regulate it because the Dust Bowl is the ecology. And
absolutely. And
that is
the Soil Conservation Service came under President Roosevelt, and they built forests on all these different farms. They got all sorts of appropriate ways of improving the soil. It made a huge difference. It changed the whole country.
But you created IFAMA, integrating agriculture, processing companies, the food system, health, ecology, the economy. And what we've just said is the ideas were already there in the 50s, and you've just explained where they come from. You've seen it, what it means, so it needed to be done. In the rest of the world, so in the policy makers, for example, in my country, in The Hague, in the Netherlands, they're talking about these integrated systems, well, since about 10 years, perhaps even less than that. And you knew that it was necessary already. And then you created IFAMA. We need to talk about that. And you decided it should be an international system. Can you tell us why you created it and what you hoped for?
Yeah, well, you keep saying I created it. There were three of us that created it. I was just one of three people.
Who are the other two?
The other one was Professor Vernon Schneider, and the other one is Professor Gail Kramer. The two of them were agricultural economists, and they came to see me and said to me, Ray, the agricultural economics profession isn't using what you're doing. How do we find a way of creating a academic organization that represents looking at the food system as a system? And the three of us sat down, and together we created a constitution, we created a mission statement, and we also wanted to make sure that we didn't alienate the agricultural economic system in the United States. So we made sure that the president of the American Agricultural Economic Association was part of the beginning of our organization. We weren't trying to alienate people. We were trying to broaden the picture of what we had. They had an International Agricultural Economic Association, but it only met every 3 years, and it didn't have the continuity and the vigor to look at the system as a system. So we decided that we would create, the three of us decided, not just me, decided that we would try to create this organization. And with the help of the president of the competing organization, recognizing that it was needed, the four of us went ahead and actually created it. I don't want to take all the credit for creating something that was a group of us, not one person.
Thank you. Thank you. So it was there, and well, it now exists for 30 years. Did it achieve what you hoped for?
Well, like everybody, you want whatever you achieve to continue to grow and be even more creative than it is. I think that nothing should stay just exactly as it is in a world that's changing so fast. And we've had so many revolutions affecting the food system, and the genetic revolution is just one of them. And because of that genetic revolution, people now realize that food is more important than popping pills when it comes to health and nutrition. So consequently, the kinds of people who are impacting the food system go far beyond what we have in IFAMA. And I was asked 5 years ago to address them, and I was on able to get my message across 5 years ago. Maybe this time I will get the message across.
Go ahead.
I feel that just as we now have business leaders and other kinds of leaders in agribusiness management as well as agricultural economists, I think that we have to broaden our base to get the environmentalists involved and to get the scientists involved and to get the medical community involved in IFAMA. I believe that it's not good enough to think of what we're doing as just a food-related system. It's a health-related system. It's a nutrition system. It's an economic development system. And it's an environmental system. And if we don't get those men and women in our organization and make IFAMA also grow and be more inclusive in the kinds of disciplines that we need, then we are not serving our next generations of teachers and managers and academic leaders and government leaders and policy leaders and not-for-profit leaders in a way that they need to be treated and in the way they need to be educated.
How did they respond to that message 5 years ago?
They applauded heavily, and it sounded like they were going to do something. But to my knowledge, I didn't move them enough.
Okay. Now that's a clear message. That's a very clear message. And what should they do in order to get this going?
What they should do is, through the case method, which they now use in lots of their teaching, is to create cases that include the health, the science, and the economic development and the environmental aspects of the food system in relationship to those different elements, and jointly create case studies with people in these other disciplines, and in the process of inviting them to their annual meetings to speak to them in a language that relates their discipline to the rest of the agribusiness activities. I feel very strongly about that. I spoke back in Minneapolis when they had their 25th anniversary, and I'm trying to speak again, and this will undoubtedly be my last time to speak to them again, given my age. I plead with them to make sure that we involve these other disciplines in our organization because they're needed. And frankly, who are the gatekeepers of the food system when it comes to people? Who are the people who tells them what to eat, how to eat, and how important that is to their health? It's the medical community. And if we don't get them involved, we're losing why we are existing as an institution and why we are existing as a fundamental multidiscipline institution that should serve society in a much broader way. I haven't finished my work, and I'm still trying to get that message across. So if I'm invited, and if they still want to use this video talk session that you and I are having, I plead with the people coming to think to do that. And that is why I created PAPSAC.
That is exactly what I want to talk about with you. But you've put this very eloquently. I think it's a very clear message. And well,
you're hearing it. I hope my colleagues hear it. But more importantly, I hope they take it to heart and work with the medical schools of their universities, work with the government schools in their universities, work with the public health people, work with the environmentalists, and work with the geneticists in their universities. I have the privilege and pleasure of doing that. And I can't tell you how much it means to both our students and to the people who come and work together.
So they'd better listen. This is a clear message. And so as I said, you've put it very eloquently in this video.
Eloquently is one thing. Effectively is something else.
Time will tell, and I'll hope you'll be there to see what they've done, because this is a new process. This is going on, not for 4 days, but we'll follow this in the next months, what is happening. So you'll be back on the show, and you can talk about it again.
From your lips to God's ears, I'll be back on the show. Okay.
Let's move over indeed to PAPSAC. You created PAPSAC, and you wrote this book, and you sent it over to me. And we can see here Marion Nassel and various people are in this book. Everyone is there, from Hugh Grant, from Monsanto to Hans-Jörg from Nestlé. Well, Marion Nassel obviously is rather critical even of companies like Nestlé. There are smallholder activists in this book, and they all seem to talk about food citizenship. They all seem to agree that it should be created. And what surprised me is that even I'm European again. We consider Monsanto to be the devil. Let's just say the way it is. Yet there are 2 CEOs of Monsanto in this book, and when you read them, they try to create shared value. So I said, hey, what is going on here? Is Goldberg mesmerizing these people, or what is it? Mike, so you created PAPSAC. You'll tell us what is PAPSAC and what is your impression? Is there indeed a coalition of the willing, but is there something that, doesn't take off? What is it? Let's start with this, with that question. This book is a book of hope. And yet, the system is in shambles. How come?
Well, it's a book of hope, and it's more than a book of hope. They're actually making a difference every day. They're actually working together every day. These are a group of people who were yelling and screaming at each other 26 years ago. And I went to the dean of the business school and asked his permission if I could create a new seminar, an off-the-record seminar to bring the private, public, not-for-profit, the medical community, the government community, and the agricultural community and the nutrition community together in a place where they could have dialogue. I said nobody trusted the government, nobody trusted the private sector. And I said the only neutral territory left was the academic world. And he said, well, I'll give you my permission. I said, well, yeah, but I want the dean of the medical school, the dean of the school of public health, and the dean of the government school to let me have faculty from their departments to be part of this as well. He said, well, you'll have to get permission of the other 3 deans, the provost of the university and the president of the university. So I said, is that all? So anyway, much to my gratification, they all agreed to let me try. And I also had 2 other people help me create PAPSAC. One was a close friend of mine that I knew from undergraduate days at Harvard, who was an outstanding internal medicine leader at Mass General Hospital, and also head of all their cancer research at Mass General Hospital. I asked him if he would sit down with me and one other person, and the other person I asked was John Dunlop. John Dunlop is a man who produced labor peace in our country in many different areas, the building industry, the electronics industry. Even when Harvard had a strike, he was the one that enabled people to come together. He also was the one who enabled the migrant worker and farm worker who was exempt from the labor unions of the Robinson-Patman Act to begin to think about finding a resolution agency that would act as an arbitrator between the food processor and the farm worker and the farm labor. And he got them to agree, and we now have a resolution agency that's housed, called the Dunlop Commission, after my colleague at Harvard Law School. And we now have labor peace between the farm worker and the food system.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that it takes a while to get people to understand that what they are in the food system is something more and important to society than just food or just nutrition or just health or just economic development or just the environment. It's all of those things together. And we need to train men and women who understand how those forces are put together. But also, you have to let people talk off the record with one another so they understand each other's problems. So I put together the most constructive, the toughest consumer advocate that I could find. I took the best labor leader that I could find. I took the best person from the medical community that I could find. I took the best person from the public health. And I took people from the government, from the FDA, the EPA, the USDA. And I took people from the developing world, from India, China, and other places, and also from the World Bank and the Food and Agriculture Organization. And I wanted a cross-section of people that could sit together, but I made sure that they realized that what they said in that room was off the record. No one would take notes. Everybody would speak from the heart. And of course, the first meeting was a disaster.
The book says that Marion Nestle said, yes, it's a disaster, but please continue.
And the fact that the toughest critic wanted me to continue made me feel that maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. And here we are. We had our 26th year last November. They are so anxious to meet that they know that with the virus, it'll be difficult to get together in November. And they think the virus has been so devastating to everything, including the food system, that we should now have Zoom meetings starting this month and every month all the way to November.
Hey, it's the same idea I had for the IFAMA conference.
Exactly.
We can shake hands.
I can't do it because my computer doesn't let me. There we go. No, I am so proud of these men and women. I was worried about how I was going to Zoom November, and next thing I knew, I got a note from the advisory group that we created within PAPSAC so that we had more than just me talking about it. And they said, Ray, we all want a meeting now. So that's what we're doing.
So that is PAPSAC. And what does PAPSAC stand for? What does it mean? PAPCA?
Public and private, scientific, consumer, food group. Public and private, scientific, agriculture and consumer group. PAPSAC. Yeah.
Right, and it's completely
a horrible name, but at least I got everybody in it.
I find it impressive. I didn't know about it, and
well, most people don't know about it
because it's so informal. And how does it relate, for example, to, or does it relate at all to something like Davos, the Davos summit?
It's very interesting that the person who created Davos came to see me about creating an organization of getting people together, because one of the other things I created 60 years ago was our agribusiness management seminar for senior managers. And he liked that concept, and he wanted to figure out he could do it for the world in Davos. And so I explained that I wanted to have a senior management seminar that encouraged people, not just from the business community, but from other parts of the society, because the food system was so important to everybody. And he liked the idea, and it's been very successful.
Okay.
So, I feel so sad seeing what's happening to my country and to other countries with the virus, and seeing how much hatred and disillusionment and hurt exists in our world today. And I see this group of men and women who once were fighting, but now talk to each other every day throughout the year.
Could you be more specific? It's hurting you, but what exactly is the effect of the virus of COVID-19 on the food system?
Well, let me give you a specific example. When you talk about creating shared value, one of the hardest parts of it is in the developing world, where most of the poverty is and most of the lack of economic development is. And the question is, when we start trying to help other people improve their livelihood, we have to help them in a way that is sustainable. And when a company like Jane Irrigation is in the book and wants to encourage farmers, small-scale farmers and large-scale, but mostly small-scale farmers in India, they are putting a huge burden on that farmer who doesn't have the capital for the equipment, doesn't have access to the market. So they not only have to provide the equipment, they have to figure out what that farmer is producing and how does he get access to the market. But also in agriculture, there's such volatility in the pricing. How do you do it in such a way that the farmer isn't worse off because he's got all this construction and capital investment? So what Jane Irrigation does is actually help that farmer get long-term contracts with a fixed price that will enable the farmer to make a profit, including the cost of improving his productivity. And Unilever, which is close to your part of the world, in the cocoa area and the other area, you know what they're doing now?
Tell me.
They're creating a cost-plus program for their farmers. They say the farmers should not have to worry about the volatility of that market and should not have to worry about all the improvements they want to help that farmer have in coffee and other or cocoa. So they give him a cost-plus contract that covers all of his costs plus gives him a profit. And if the market goes higher, they'll give him that price. If it goes lower, they'll still give him the cost plus. I think that is going to change the developing world more than anything else I can think of. And they also have child labor laws now that are getting these youngsters from having to work in the fields and not get educated. And finally, women in our food system are better recognized. Women were taken advantage of, got inferior pay, and sometimes were treated unfairly. So the food system has a chance to make our world so much better. But more importantly, it has a way to show the rest of the world how we can all get together. And in my book, I purposely tried to find an example of that. And there are 2 Republican senators and 2 Democratic senators were worried about food deserts in my country, in the United States. They decided to create a bill to enable the improvement of food deserts in the places where food was not available in my country. And if they can do that in the food system, if they can do what we're all doing in the food system, and if we can get the academic community to have a multidiscipline approach to our problems, because these are multidiscipline problems. They're not one discipline problems. If we can do that education-wise, and if we can do that operationally-wise, if we can do that financially wise and market access wise, I think if the biggest economic system of the world can begin to do that, maybe the rest of the world can take notice and say, enough is enough. We can work together. We've got to work together. And we've got to do a better job of picking the kinds of leaders we have who bring us together rather than tear us apart. When people are hurting, they tend to buy into people who tell them it's somebody else's fault that you're hurting, and I'll take care of you. We need leaders who say, let's take care of each other. That's what we need. But
it's not the one you have right now. And that's what you're telling us. We can do it.
Yeah.
But he's wrecking that kind of hope.
Unfortunately, he is. But a lot of people had faith in him and voted for him because they wanted the country to be like the country was before. They don't really want that. What they really want is the country to be something much better than it's ever been.
Ray, thank you very much for this interview and for this last message. I'd like you to be on the show every month in order to comment on what is going on and how the IFAMA community is progressing on the message you've given them earlier on in this interview. Thank you very much. I'm happy to have met you, and I'm happy to have done this interview with you.
I have a favor to ask you. Food Citizenship has been reviewed by my agricultural economists very favorably, and other economists and other disciplines. I don't know how to get a review of this book in the general public review so that people can understand there is part of the world economy that's learned how to work together. Because we desperately need that message. And this book is full of that message. I mean, we've got labor leaders, union leaders, we've got people from China doing things together with people in the United States as partners. We have people learning how to make it better for society. And I don't know how to get an example of that to the rest of the world to see that a goodly part of our society is beginning to figure out how to do that.
Ray, I promise you, we'll write about it, bring it to the press, together with this interview.
And all the funds go to Harvard, not to me. I'm not trying to sell a book to make money. I'm trying to sell a book to solve a problem.
Okay.
Nice being with you.
We will. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.